Yes, Naledi, and it is about all of the budget cuts, even though the previous ministers of finance, including Tito Mboweni, had said to us that, listen, as far as they are concerned, as far as he was concerned at the time, that he doesn't believe that this is austerity measures that he announced when he was the finance minister. But we see what has been happening throughout the years, and also the impact that those budget cuts have had on the quality of services being delivered by the state. The state has also been put under pressure to reduce the wage bill for civil servants, and just now they came out of a multi-year agreement, a 5.5% increase for this financial year, and after the next 2 years it will be based on inflation or CPI. As you know, that the 5.5% increase is above CPI. Some analysts are saying that this is going to apply more pressure on the fiscus, but joining us now is COSATU's Parliamentary Coordinator, Matthew Sparks. Matthew, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. I want to start off with this one first. We were telling our viewers earlier on about the Business Day article this morning, running with the story of a possibility of a VAT increase. Has COSATU heard anything about this? But what's your take on any possibility of what has been termed a regressive tax?
Yeah. Look, there's been lots of media speculation that there would be a VAT hike. We'll be deeply concerned about that. We think it would not make sense. We don't think there's a need for a VAT hike. We think there's other ways to generate revenue for the state. But the problem with the VAT hike is that it squeezes workers. Workers are already struggling with the cost of living. They've seen significant inflation in the last 2 or 3 years. They've seen significant increases in electricity prices, municipal tariffs, transport, food, and so forth. And to squeeze workers further is simply untenable. Most workers are drowning in debt. And for us, the solution is not to increase taxes, which hurt the poor, is actually to fix the state, make sure the state provides quality public services, to remove the obstacles to economic growth, to get the economy growing, to create jobs, because that generates the revenue the state requires. But we also think there's a better alternative to VAT. Rather give SARS 3 billion rand, they can generate an additional 60 billion rand in taxes already owed to the state, not new taxes. And that for us is a more fair regime, but to squeeze workers further, we think is untenable.
Yeah. When that decision was taken back in 2018, some analysts had even warned back then that this is not the right step to take, considering, of course, our cost of living. But the possibility of a 2% VAT increase, that is really going to impact workers and the population at large. But then how do you get the economy to grow on the back of a VAT increase?
So that's part of the problem, the VAT increase. It takes money out of workers' pockets, which means they spend less money in the economy. It takes money out of the economy generally. And for us, really, if you want to grow the economy, you've got to make sure Eskom has got the material it requires to provide reliable but also affordable electricity, especially for the mining industry, for other industries. Make sure that transit is working, because that's key to unlocking mining, manufacturing, agriculture. You've got to get Metro Rail working, because that's key to transporting 10 million commuters in our cities to work on time. Fix municipalities, because that's key also to make sure the municipalities can provide municipal services to companies in rural towns, etc. So for us, it's about unlocking, removing the obstacles to economic growth. It's not about squeezing workers further.
Yeah. It's not about squeezing workers further. Yesterday, the government announced that 5.5% multi-year wage agreement with public servants. The rating agencies have already said that our wage bill is too high. It keeps on ballooning. You have a different take on this, of course, as COSATU.
Yeah, so look, for the wage bill, it reached a peak some decades ago at about 40% of the budget. For the past decade, since 2008, it was at 35% of the budget. It was stable. In the past 2 years, because of the freeze and vacancies, below inflation increases, it's actually decreased to 31% of the budget. So it's the wage bill crisis actually that is shrinking, that we're not filling critical vacancies like nurses and teachers, police officers, doctors and paramedics and so forth. We're seeing a rising ratio of learners to teachers, of health workers to patients, and that's impacting negatively upon the quality of public services. For us, it's really about fixing the state, make sure money is spent well, but most critically, we don't have an expenditure crisis. We have a revenue crisis because of a growth crisis. So if you want to resolve it, you've got to grow the economy, you've got to help businesses to thrive, you have to create jobs. So if you do that, companies and workers can pay the tax that the state requires, but simply cutting the pie smaller and smaller, it doesn't resolve the fundamental crisis, which is an economic growth crisis.
But where would that money then come from to plug that particular hole and that above inflation increase?
So for us, the critical thing is give SARS the resources. SARS has shown that it's a highly efficient state institution. They've managed to rebuild the state. Rebuild SARS. It was part of the epicenter of state capture and corruption. But we're saying, sorry, thanks. The morning sun in Cape Town's hitting me. So SARS has shown you a model to fix the state. They've appointed competent management, they've removed corrupt elements, they've filled frontline vacancies, they've invested in infrastructure capacity. So SARS has taken us from a 61 to a 64% tax compliance rate. That's made an additional 60 billion rand. What SARS is saying now, give us 3 billion rand. We can take tax compliance from 64 to 67% of the budget, of the tax compliance. Yeah. That's the additional 60 billion rand you need. That's a far more efficient way than a VAT hike. The last time we had a VAT hike, they promised us it was going to deliver a huge amount of money. It barely delivered half of what they promised. And it inflicts huge amounts of pain on workers and the economy. So for us, rather make sure we collect the taxes that are already owed. SARS said there's about 800 billion rand of outstanding tax owed to the state. Let's rather give SARS the resources it needs as opposed to squeezing those who already pay their taxes.
Okay. You have various programs taking place today across the country. What's the focus of these programs? What's your call that you're making?
Basically, our call is threefold. One is to fix the state, make sure the state has resources the economy and society need to grow, stimulate the economy, inject liquidity in the economy, help businesses to thrive, give them the support they need from infrastructure, from SOEs, etc., and reduce unemployment. Ramp up public employment programs to help people find their way into the labour market to gain the skills and experience they need to find permanent jobs, and also critically to give SARS the resources it needs to collect the revenue the state requires to fund these activities. In the Western Cape we have activities. There's about 2,400 teachers who have lost their jobs in the Western Cape. They have activities in KZN where also 19,000 jobs are on jeopardy. We have activities in Limpopo and Gauteng. So I think really the message is to government, fix the state, grow the economy, create jobs. Don't look for shortcuts.
Don't look for shortcuts. The other one is the Government of National Unity. Of course, this will be the first budget speech under the Government of National Unity. COSATU being a member of the Tripartite Alliance, being led by the ANC. What's your assessment of the Government of National Unity when it comes to fiscal discipline, number one, but also on the other end, economic growth, if we take our cue from the medium-term budget policy statement?
Look, we don't see a fundamental shift between the GNU, between the previous administrations. If you look at the economic indicators, we've been struggling along at 1% GDP growth for the last decade. We are sitting at 41% plus unemployment, 70% youth unemployment, and that's not a good scorecard to look at. We're not saying we expect miracles overnight, but we need to see unemployment falling by at least 1% each quarter. In the past year, unemployment fell by 1%. So we're barely managing to keep our head above water. You need the economy to grow by at least 3% a year to begin to turn the tide of unemployment. And every year we're having more young people leaving school, leaving university, entering the labour market, and we're not creating the jobs that are required to absorb them. So I think for us, it's not a pretty scorecard. And I think our frustration is that Treasury, irrespective of which administration, always takes a business as usual approach, a minimalist approach. And I think for us, we need a decisive Marshall Plan to really get the economy growing.
Okay. We're asking our viewers this morning, Matthew, what should Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana prioritize in his budget speech? I'd like to ask you that question as well. The options that we have here, and I'm sure you'd say everything, but I'd like you to only choose one. Public safety, unemployment, healthcare services, or economic infrastructure. Public safety, unemployment, healthcare services, or economic infrastructure?
Look, we'd always say unemployment. That's the number one crisis of the country. Everything else we do is not going to be sustainable if you don't get people into jobs. You reduce the pressure on the state, if people have jobs, can take care of themselves. And of course that means you've got to get the economy growing. The two are linked together. Yeah. But that for us is the most fundamental issue. And at times you don't find that government, nationally, provincially, locally, treats it as a burning crisis it is, and we're going to have a society imploding one day if we don't reverse unemployment.
Thank you so much for your time. Matthew Sparks is the Parliamentary Coordinator for COSATU, joining us ahead of the budget speech that will be delivered by the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, at around 2 o'clock later on this morning. So participate in our poll and tell us what you think the Finance Minister should be prioritizing when he makes his budget announcement later on this afternoon. Public safety, unemployment, healthcare services, economic infrastructure. What's your take on it? We'll be reading some of your comments towards the end of the show.